You're listening to JS Party, a weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Find us on the web at jsparty.fm, on the Fediverse at jsparty, at changelog.social, and of course, wherever you get your podcasts, just search for JS Party, you'll find us. Thanks to our partners at Fly. Launch your app near your users for peak performance. Fly makes it easy. Learn more at fly.io. Okay, hey, it's party time, y'all.
Welcome to another exciting JS Party. I'm your host this week, Nick Nisi. Ahoy, hoy. And joining me after a long time, it's been quite a while. How's it going, Bone Skull?
Super, yeah. Haven't been on a show in a little while just because I'm lazy, but here I am.
You're just loving life and having fun and not talking about this wonderful JavaScript world.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
And we have another special guest with us. Joining the podcast once again is Josh Goldberg. Josh, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I also haven't been on in a while. I feel a sense of kinship with Bone Skull.
Yeah, I think it's been almost a year, maybe a little longer since you were last on. And I think the episode title was 10 Years of TypeScript Bliss.
Oh, yeah.
Celebrating 10 years of writing this wonderful language that Bone Skull loves so much.
Wild.
I've warmed on it.
Yes.
Because of that episode?
No.
No.
No. But I've warmed on it. Yeah. I'm not like, a fanboy or whatever. But, I like my types.
This just made my week. I am so excited about this, and I can't wait to tell Jared, who's not here.
I still mostly write JavaScript with, doc strings. But still, they're types.
Perfect,
types are types are types.
Yeah.
Right?
You're close. That's basically what TypeScript is.
Pretty much. Well, cool. Yeah, that's exciting news. So, Josh, for those of the audience who may not know you, why don't you give us an intro?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Josh. I work full-time independent open source, which means instead of one specific company funding my work, I work kind of in the open on a few different projects, each of which brings in a little bit of funding. The main projects I work on, I'm a core maintainer on typescript-eslint. That's the big one. Also, I recently, thanks to Bone Skull, actually, earlier this year, joined the maintenance team at Mocha, and I'm a committer on eslint. So if you're writing JavaScript or TypeScript, there's a very good chance that code that I help maintain, perhaps even have written, is running in your editor as we speak.
That's awesome. And then another thing I think that you were maybe working on last year, or I don't know, I was just on your website, and one of your recent blog posts was about it. Recent-ish blog posts was about all the work that you did to modernize Definitely Typed. So that definitely touches everyone.
Yeah. So I'm distracted. Bone Skull is giving me a very inquisitive look and has been for about a minute now.
No, that's just my face.
Okay.
That's just my face.
I'll get used to it.
Don't mind my face. I can turn off my camera if you don't want to look at it.
Please don't.
It's a fantastic face. I've just been mesmerized by it,
Lost okay.
Okay. Part of the joy of being independent and open source means that I can jump around the GitHubs and touch stuff that I think is useful. So one of the quote unquote side projects that I did was helping the Definitely Typed folks first move off of off of using a linter for formatting and instead use a dedicated formatter, specifically dprint for formatting. And then that was helpful in also helping them move off of TESLint, which is an old deprecated linter, and onto ESLint with TypeScript-eslint, which means now Definitely Typed is using much more similar tooling to the rest of the TypeScript ecosystem. Fewer people are using TESLint, and there's nice community dogfooding of dprint, which is, I think, all very nice for the ecosystem. So I'm happy.
That is awesome. Awesome to hear. I didn't know that such a big project was still using TSLint, but I shouldn't be surprised. So that's really awesome. And a good shout out for dprint. I haven't had a chance to play with that yet, but it looks really interesting.
Dprint is great. Yeah, it's like prettier, but faster. I've never had problems with prettier speed until I've worked on a code base the size of TypeScript or Definitely Typed. And it actually kind of does make a difference at that scale.
That is interesting. I'm just trying to see, like, where the speed improvements come from. Is it like running it in the command line? Because I guess like most of the time when I run Prettier, it's just like my editor on save is just reformatting that file.
Yeah. So honestly, most of the time, it really doesn't make a difference. Like if you just have one file, Prettier is fine. It doesn't matter if it's 1 millisecond or 200 milliseconds. But if you need to, say, update the tool and CI on an automatic renovate or dependent bot PR, and then you want to run it on every file, when you have whatever tens of thousands of files, it tends to take a little longer. So that's one nice situation. Also, TypeScript itself has a 50,000 plus line file, the notorious, the acclaimed checker.ts. And at that point, it does make a difference, in your on save editor speed.
Is it like Rust or Go or something like that?
Oh yeah, it's one of those native speed ones, Rust.
Very cool. Well, yeah, that's definitely a project worth checking out, and it could. Yeah, I hope not to run into any 50,000 line files in my day-to-day work anytime soon, but I'll remember that. All right, so let's talk about ESLint. There's some changes to that have recently, or over the last year maybe, they've been on my radar, at least with the flat config. But then also tell us about what's the latest going on in TypeScript ESLint.
Sure. I'll start with flat config. That's okay, because it kind of predates a lot of stuff. ESLint has traditionally had what we call legacy now, but just the ESLint RC file. And it used to be that this was the only way to configure ESLint, or at least that format was. You could have it in a file and or in your package JSON, and you could have nested files on disks. Like if you have a monorepo, each package could have its own ESLint config. Then also ESLint configs could have overrides. Say you want to change all TypeScript files to have the TypeScript parser, or all YAML files to be parsed now. Well, now we have this kind of ridiculous system where you have overrides in files, and it's really hard to map which file, especially if you have multiple nested configs, applies which overrides. Also, the ESLint RC format doesn't actually use ECMAScript modules, or CommonJS requires. It does these weird string aliases that then get mapped to what is essentially the node require algorithm, but not quite exactly that. It works as a format, but they're confusing points. So now ESLint has this new format called flat config. It's flat because you only have one file. It just exports an array of settings and that's it. That's done. You can't have nested configurations. And it actually has you import, or CommonJS require, your packages. There's no weird string indexing in the format. So overall, it's been a little bit of a work item for folks to migrate over to, but the format is objectively, I think, a lot better.
Yeah, there was some a little bit of drama about the flat config recently on Twitter. Like people that are upgrading to ESLint 9 are shocked and confused and angry that essentially the file format has changed. And they are mad because all the plugins that they use have not yet upgraded to this new format, because any plugin will also need to upgrade to the format. So yeah, I mean, what I know that this has been in the works for a while. The old config format was soft deprecated in version 8. Is that correct of ESLint?
Yeah, I don't know whether deprecation is the exact words they used, but it was explicitly stated in V8, hey, this is not going to be the thing forever. V9 will switch the defaults to only allowing flat config, which is what's happened.
Yeah, and it's curious to me that it's been in the works for a long time. Like, we've known about this, and if you've been paying attention, but it took so many people by surprise. Why do you think it took so many people by surprise?
Great question. This is a hard one for me to answer because politically, I have since joined the ESLint team right about when flat config was really, getting thrust onto people with V9. So I not only wasn't a part of ESLint core when these decisions were being made, but now I'm on ESLint core and don't want to trash talk. So I'm going to try to speak very precisely without ascribing blame anywhere. I think the problem is twofold. One is that people generally don't like their linter. It's a very common thing that people associate it with the negatives. So they tend to not look at it. Not that many people get really excited about ESLint's blog posts. And then two is that I think there was a lack of activity on core ESLint where they could have done more to outreach to the community, to file issues on repos that are containing plugins that haven't been migrated, to post up like a tracking issue or discussion showing all the community ones. And although some of that has been done, actually for a lot of repos that's since been done, it wasn't done until really late, until ESLint v9 was already about to be released. So the timing has not been ideal there. I think it's those two things in conjunction that people tend not to come to ESLint, and then this particular time ESLint didn't come to the people. That's caused that gap between the two.
Also, I mean, I'm not sure about how this shook down, but if ESLint comes with a breaking change to the config format, it's important to communicate not just what it is and when it's coming, but why you're doing it. For so many people, it seems like, well, it was working fine for me, right? And, now it's not. Now I have to do more work to change it. And they don't understand why and why it was so important to do. And while I do appreciate the new format, I am also curious. It can't just be because it was hard to use, because everybody was using it and it was working for so many people. So what were the reasons for making that change? And that's what I'm curious about. I don't know if you can answer that question.
I can. And in fact, there's a huge 3-parter blog post from creator maintainer ESLint Nicholas Akis going into that. It worked, but it didn't work great. There were a lot of issues. For example, a lot of people, when they started to get bigger configs, especially monorepo ones, would get tripped up on the differences between what applies in extended configs when you have multiple files versus overrides in one or more files. That was a confusion point. The other big one is that in flat config, you'd say things like const ts-eslint equals require typescript-eslint, or the equivalent with imports. And in legacy and traditional configs, you would just refer to them by their string name, like plugin : typescript-eslint. And that has subtle weirdnesses when you're trying to map that weird resolution system on top of what is now a standardized spec of ECMAScript modules. Those are the two big ones. And I think it's possible to tell people about those, and maybe they can have empathy that if they were to get a big enough code base where those matter, that's big. But I think honestly, a third important reason is that the old system was convoluted and hard to maintain. And the ESLint project, because it's a fully independent open source project, can't have the operating budget to deal with that crap. Money is important, therefore time is important, and it's just not well spent on maintaining a convoluted old config system that has so many user-facing flaws. Even if ESLint were like a well-funded project, it doesn't strike me as worth the budget if there's an opportunity to move to an objectively better format long-term.
Yeah, and the, I guess, reason I'm not involved with the project in any way, but I assumed that this was like a nice way to get rid of a lot of those configs and consolidate into a more modern one, and also ride the coattails of anger that is moving over to ESM, and kind of just be like, well, here's an ESM format that we can all move to, and that'll be the future anyway. And it does a lot of things that I really like about it is it's really utilizing a lot of the language, you're spreading out these different configs together to put them all together. So you're using the language to define this, and it's really easy to follow along if you know the language features to be able to see that. And there's less quote unquote magic in what you said, where these names map loosely to require calls or import calls or whatever. That said, I do feel in the new config, maybe you can help me understand a little better, but is there still a little bit of that magic around? And I'm thinking specifically between the names of rules and mapping to the name that you assign it as a for plugins. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah, it does make sense. I will admit I don't like that this is the system, but I don't personally have a better one. In both flat and legacy configs, the way you specify plugin rules is plugin name /rule, like typescript-eslint / no floating promises. In legacy, in ESLint RC, that plugin name was just the name of the package, which is actually why it was kind of hard in legacy config to use local rules. There was a third-party plugin that would load in your local files for rules. Now, in this new system, you're just importing or requiring, so there's no actual name. So the way that you register that is now a magic string, where in TypeScript-eslint, we've told people you should always register it as plugins : TypeScript-eslint. with an @ sign in front of it. But in theory, people could register the same plugin twice under different string keys and thus have the rules enabled twice under different names, which I don't like. That's unfortunate magic. But I don't know of a way around it, which is why the original RFC from 2019 that took until 2022 to implement, no one figured out a better way that we should use instead.
Fair. That's totally fair. But that is like one of the like, it felt like I was moving away from some magic, and then it was like, oh, here's some more magic. And I agree with that. But it's easy because I want to name those things like, at typescript-eslint / whatever, and fight my urges to be lazy and call it just like at TS or something. And yeah. But it can make configs a little bit more convoluted.
Yeah, a little more convoluted, a little more magical. I would love a way for plugins to be able to say, this is my name, you better use it. There was an issue filed somewhere that may eventually get implemented, but I think right now the stage is we're still seeing how people use this plugin, this format, so still in evaluation.
So ESLint has been out for a while. I'm looking at those blog posts, and I think, like you said, the first one was August 3rd, 2022, kind of talking about that and the changes that were coming. I know that I started using it last year at some point, although it was a little rough. Like I'm just looking at my old config, and like I'm using typescript-eslint, but I had to cast it as any in the plugins to make it actually be useful because the types were different. Because typescript-eslint didn't officially support the flat config quite yet. So from that point, like you're in a unique position to kind of see both sides from the inside. Like, what's that been like in terms of adoption? Has it caused extra headaches or problems as people want to jump the gun and migrate, but TS-ESLint isn't ready yet? Things like that.
Yeah, we're one of the plugins that basically blocks you from migrating to a core ESLint upgrade if we don't support it. And to a lesser extent, also with TypeScript. You can use us with newer versions. It's just we don't guarantee it'll work. And then a lot of people were annoyed at us because we didn't support flat config until a little bit after ESLint, fully jumped on board. We actually still don't support ESLint 9 in our main version. At time of recording, right now, our main version is V7. We have a beta out and have for a couple months of our V8. I think around time of release is also when we're releasing V8. So let's say congrats to us. We just supported ESLint V9 in stable. Yay. But ESLint V9 was released earlier this year, and we're recording in July. So it's been a while.
Wait, I'm confused because I've used TypeScript-eslint in a flat config.
We didn't support it for a while, but we do support it now. Flat config support is actually not the same as ESLint V9 support. It's just that because ESLint V9 turned flat config to the only supported one by default when you don't pass in an environment variable or option, people assume the two are the same, but they're not.
Between ESLint and TypeScript, you have to kind of keep pace with both of those projects. How's that been? Is it easy to? I can't imagine it's easy to support like new syntax in TypeScript, right? Or is it?
It's normally fine. Once in a while, there's some obnoxiously different thing that we have to adjust for that's difficult in either ESLint or TypeScript. But for the most part, it's just an added tax that every 3 months, we have to support new TypeScript features, or every couple years, year or two, we have to support a new ESLint version. Unfortunately, both projects are big and stable enough. They're both over a decade old. Congrats to each, that they're not shaking too much these days. But yeah, I wish we didn't have to constantly keep up with everyone else. It would be nice. I haven't looked at the guts of TypeScript-eslint, but are you taking the TypeScript AST and then like converting it into what ESLint uses? Is that what happens inside? I love it. That's exactly what happens inside. How did you know?
I didn't think of any other way that could be done. You get what you get from TypeScript, and that is not the same thing that you get out of ESLint, so it must convert.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. That's the logical conclusion that everyone went through. In order to keep up with TypeScript versions, we basically need to use their parser, because otherwise we'd be re-implementing their parser. So whenever someone wants to parse their TypeScript code with ESLint, TypeScript-eslint's parser will generate the TypeScript tree behind the scenes and then convert that into the equivalent ESLint or ESPRE or TypeScript ES-tree representation. And then we give both of those back. So if a lint rule needs to get to the TypeScript tree, such as to retrieve type information for a rule, like no floating promises. How do you know if it's a promise? Well, then you have to jump from the ESLint tree to the equivalent TypeScript tree and then pass that to the TypeScript API.
So is it not always clear where you need to go? If I wanted to implement a rule in typescript-eslint, that sounds hard, right? Because you need to know exactly where that rule, like which AST it needs to touch, or both, or what. Is that accurate?
It's accurate that you do need to know, but fortunately the answer is almost always just use the ESLint version, the TypeScript ES tree. ES tree is what we call the ESLint one. We actually added wrapper APIs, I want to say a little less than a year ago, so that you, for most rules, never actually need to touch the TypeScript shenanigans under the hood. If you want to get the type of a node, which is a little part of your file, we expose an API where you can pass in the ESLint equivalent node, and it'll give you back the TypeScript type. It just maps it for you, so you don't have to think about the differences.
Are plugins for TypeScript ESLint a thing? Is that a thing that people make? Can you do that?
You can make plugins for ESLint, such as TypeScript ESLint's ESLint plugin, the naming of which is indeed TypeScript-eslint/ESLint-plugin. And then we expose tools that help you make your own TypeScript-flavored plugins for ESLint. But at its core, we are an ESLint plugin, an ESLint parser, and a set of tools to help you do those things.
And when we're talking about plugins, just to clarify, would a plugin be like a collection of lint rules?
Yeah.
Or would it be anything else?
Yeah, good clarification. In the ESLint world, fun fact, actually, there's a glossary on eslint.org, one of my favorite things I've helped with, because there are quite a few terms that are specific to ASTs or static analysis or even linters. So on the glossary, I would encourage any listener to just read through it. It's actually really good information for general programming. So the first entry in the glossary, A, abstract syntax tree, AST, it's a representation of your code, kind of like a JSON description of it. A plugin in the ESLint world, is a collection of rules. For example, you might have like the TypeScript ESLint plugin that has TypeScript rules, or there's all sorts of stuff like imports. Specifically, a plugin is able to provide rules. It can provide preset configs, like our recommended or recommended type checked. And then it can also provide processors, which are things that can say, take in a markdown file and tell you that there's a JavaScript file to be linted like JavaScript in some code block. So that's plugins, preset configs, which can be on their own or part of a plugin, processors, which most people don't use, and then rules, which are the really important part of the plugins.
But a parser is a different thing.
Yes. A parser takes in your raw file and turns it into an AST. So a parser is actually completely separate from the plugin. It just so happens that we're a monorepo that exports packages with the same org prefix that are both a plugin, TypeScript ESLint plugin, and then the parser, TypeScript ESLint parser. And
you need both.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now that we've gone through the 15 minutes of requisite docs and glossary reading, this is a big part of why a lot of people are excited about competitors or neighbors. I like to call them like Biome and OXLint, because it is conceptually not light to configure ESLint. And people are very excited about tools that let them do that, but with a very clean config that doesn't require knowing these things.
I haven't used Biome yet. I vaguely am aware of what it is, but how does it get away from that? Is it just more, is it like prettier in terms of like it's less configurable? So it's more of like this is the one way to do it, the opinionated way to do it, whereas ESLint is more like you bring your own opinion, or like how does that work?
Yeah, it's a little like the Vite thing where Webpack was popular and good, and Webpack still does a lot. But Vite is structurally simpler, more straightforward to configure. There are some things that, because Biome is relatively newer, doesn't yet support. But overall, yeah, instead of having to set up an import from some ESLint thing, some package, and then export of et cetera, there's just a Biome config file where you enable or disable rules. And then in theory, once they add plugins, you'll be able to add plugins too. Bone Skull, I swear, your face changed. You are more displeased now. I'm sorry, I haven't hung out with you guys. I haven't talked with either of you in a while. I'm still getting used to it.
I saw it too.
I just have resting grouch face. I don't know. The listeners can't see it, so it's irrelevant. Let's just ignore me.
Hey friends, I'm here with Brian Clark, VP of Product at Neon. You know we use Neon. We love Neon. So Brian, you're both a fan and a listener of the show. So you kind of know what our shows are about, who we reach. And of those folks that listen to our podcasts, what do you think they need to know most about Neon?
I think the thing I found in talking to developers is that they really don't understand database branching. Sometimes they'll say, is it expensive or is it slow? Or like, I don't really understand where it fits in. And so we're changing the face of it a bit to like maybe focus less on branching because that's the tool and more on like maybe calling it database previews. So you can better see how it fits into your development environment. The more people can understand, oh, I get it. Like, any changes you make, they don't affect production. Like this is a separate copy. The cost of those changes is only the difference between production and whatever changes you made. So if you deleted a bunch of things or added new data, things like that, you're only actually paying the difference because we use copy on write. So I think it's like these sets of things is what I have the team really focused on. Getting people to really grasp database preview environments. And then like, what's the advantage? And like, can I use it in my system? And that's where I'm like, yeah, like you should be taking this system on. Like this will increase your confidence. It doesn't cost a lot. It's super fast. That idea isn't out there. And I think it's because it's not in most products. Most databases don't have this kind of integration.
Okay, so a concern I've heard out there is why not just run Postgres local? Why database branching? Why preview branches? However you want to frame it. A serverless, managed, in the cloud Postgres may be more latent or slower than a local copy. It may cost more. There's more storage. Debunk this. Help me understand the true cost, the true speed. Lay it on me.
So in a pull request, like a preview environment, this system is fast. So Neon databases spin up in 500 milliseconds or less. You're not affecting the speed of your CI/CD system at all. The copy on write for our storage means that there's no actual operation. It's like a kind of a null operation when we create a branch. You instantly have access to the production data, but nothing has changed. Only until you start writing do we actually save the differences there. Yeah, you're not paying for extra data. It's not like you're creating a fork and then you like allocate a whole other 200 gigabyte storage system and a whole other separate compute. We attach compute directly to the original storage. Yeah, those things are super fast, and that's in the pull request environment. For the most part, on your desktop environment, your laptop environment, you won't notice a slowdown there. And you can do reset and things like that. So you can make a bunch of changes. You can use our CLI and do branch reset, and it'll just reset with whatever the parent branch was. But I completely understand the need for people to want to have a purely local environment, and I want to get there.
So Neon is super fast. Production, managed, serverless databases that are basically never idle. They wake up in less than 500 milliseconds. That's fast. It's managed, it scales, it branches. What else do you need? Learn more at neon.tech. That's neon.tech. Neon.tech.
So that leads to another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and that is, and I've totally forgotten the name that you have for it, but like this idea of like standard setups, kind of like the typescript-eslint recommended, but I've seen a lot of people kind of make their own, configs that they then just import into their projects and gently extend from there, so that they did all the work to set it up once and have everything mostly the way they want, and then they just kind of tweak things at a much smaller level for each individual project. You have one. I forgot what it's called. Do you want to mention it?
Create TypeScript app.
Create TypeScript app. Thank you. I knew it was something like that, but I couldn't remember.
CTA.
So do you want to explain what you do in that? And I'm also just curious, like what you think about that trend that I've seen, or maybe I'm just like very biasedly looking at people who have done that.
I like that trend. I think it's really useful for linters and for people to do the thing where, everyone does this with all of their tooling, right? You have something that works and then you copy and paste it into a new project. And then once in a while you change something, and then over the years it evolves. I think it's really useful to see what people tend to want to enable or disable for rules, both because it's important. Like one of the big selling points of ESLint over what was it was competing with 10 years ago is that you can configure it. That's a big important thing. And then as we see folks consistently take the same actions, We actually do tend to reflect that in the preset configs. For typescript-eslint, for example, there are a lot of rules that used to be recommended because they are objectively correct and good rules, but they're so strict and people just really rebelled against it. They didn't. It wasn't worth it for them on average to enable those rules, which is why we pulled out the strict preset from recommended.
What's an example of one that's too onerous for people to want to use?
I just plugged open typescript-eslint.io/rules in my browser, and you can filter now to what config group things are in. So I'm going to filter to everything that's in strict and not recommended. Ooh. No array delete is the first one. You can use the delete operator in JavaScript and TypeScript, but it does weird things when it's on an array. That rule actually, I think, might be an example of we're putting it in strict to test it out, and then we'll eventually move it to recommended.
But what's one that you've taken out because it was awful?
Where is it? Oh, no non-null assertion. Stopping you from using the exclamation mark operator.
Oh, I hate that one.
You don't like that rule?
No, I do not like that rule. I got it sent to Warren because it still bothers me. It's like sometimes you just have to use it unless you want to just do a type assertion, right? And it's just it saves time. I don't know. I hate it.
Well, first of all, why are you writing not type safe code?
Okay. Is there foo in the set has returns true? And then I can get it. And that is my thing. And it's like, okay, I can either use a type assertion or the non-null assertion.
You're right. And we do have a rule that enforces you using the non-null assertion if it's equivalent to the type assertion, like instead of as string, if it's already string or undefined. That you bring up a great point, actually. And there are always, when you're writing dynamic code, there are always going to be cases where you actually do need to use the type assertion. So the real user difference is not you should always adhere to the lint, or the lint rules are always correct. It's the lint rules are what's correct most or all of the time. And if you know there's an exception, you should disable the lint rule with a comment explaining why. And then if that is so common that it's inconvenient and not worth the lint rule, turn that lint rule off. Dear God, it's not worth it, rather than hate the linter and get resentful over time.
Yes, that was exactly what I was going to say, is like, it's not that I never want to do that. It's that it forces you to put that comment in there and then have a comment of why you're disabling it right there. So it's a way to justify, yes, I need it in this case. And it's not just like there's no documentation as to why, so that you or a coworker in 6 months comes by and sees, why are we doing this? And then just, deletes that. It's there, and it forces you to think about it and know about it. To that end, one thing, because I used to work on a fairly large monorepo project, lots of TypeScript apps all together in one. And one thing that I wanted to write, but I never got around to, and I never actually checked to see if it exists, is a way to go through and statically analyze to find those ESLint disables and then sort them by the most common one to see we are actually using this all the time. Should we actually just make that a rule? Do you know if that exists yet?
I don't. I feel like I've seen people make ad hoc dashboards for this kind of thing, but I've never seen it that I can remember in a product or tool. I know that ESLint Nibble is a really nice project, but it works. It's more for rules you haven't yet enabled rather than rules you are currently disabling, I think. It's a good idea though, Nick. You should build that.
Patent pending.
That's the difference between open source and corporate life. In corporate life, you say patent pending and try to stop people from making things. In open source, I just tell everyone my ideas in the hopes that someone will do it so I don't have to buy the domain name,
Yes.
I also want to shout out the ESLint plugin, ESLint comments plugin for ESLint. It's in the ESLint community org. It's able to enforce good practices around ESLint comments. Like if you disable a rule, also include an explanation why.
Okay. I was wondering if that was just a built-in thing or if that was a plugin that I had added. So that's great.
So I totally derailed you with this talk about the rules that people are disabling. What were you talking about?
I don't know, because no one ever in my projects disables ESLint rules or writes anything other than... No, that's a joke. I think one of the beautiful things about working in linting, what really gets me excited, is that even though this is not a new concept, we're still learning core things about users and the user behavior. Like we just revamped flat config. There's an ESLint rewrite project that just got started, code started, where they're trying to make ESLint more of a generalized tool, such that TypeScript would be just another language. Same with JavaScript. I think it's really cool to see the proliferation of stuff like ESLint rewrite, biome, and so on as folks try to resolve this problem.
Oh, you were talking about create TypeScript app or something.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about scaffolding. And, you know, back in the day, if we wanted to scaffold things, we would use Yeoman, right? And
yeah,
it's kind of crusty and old. And maybe there should be a new modern way to easily scaffold things. And I've seen people try, but nothing is really stuck. And I wonder why that is. But I would love to see like a great general purpose scaffolder that's easy to use and not terrible and modern, and build somebody, please. Thanks.
Yes. So that's what I'm doing with Create TypeScript app, where right now it is just a generalized starter for TypeScript apps. And I've been using it on all my new repos. But the problem then becomes, how do you adapt the application to what everyone needs? If I'm writing a GitHub action, the build step is different from just like a CLI versus ... So my goal with it is to make it super duper configurable now, and then eventually pull out a kind of generalized framework akin to Yeoman. I think that thing was nice back in the day, but using the more kind of modern practices that we were now, I think that I probably wouldn't use any kind of templating library like Mustache or Handlebars. I would just have people write plugins that are just JavaScript/TypeScript. And then they would generate, say, like an object describing files with some metadata explaining how it interacts with like your package dependencies or other files. I don't have a solid vision of how this would look, but my intent is that Create TypeScript app should eventually just be a consumer of that, because I agree. It's very inconvenient that in this ecosystem, we don't actually have a standard way to scaffold new projects or to build things like Create Next app or Create TypeScript app. It's really an inconvenience.
Yeah, I always wanted something like that, and I got so frustrated by trying to like build my own Yeoman plugin like 5 times, and I was just like, okay. I give up, and I created a template on a GitHub repo, right? And that's what I use. And now I'm thinking, well, I should probably throw Renovate on that and just keep everything up to date, because even if I do that, the template gets old, and if it's not maintained, and it's like if I don't create a new project for a couple months, like it's already too late. Anyway. I really hope you solve that.
It's a hard question. What do you do when your template updates? How do you indicate accidental, this can be removed differentiation versus, no, I intend to, say, add in these lint rules or have this second build step or whatever. It's a hard problem.
Chris, you got me thinking about my history with ESLint, and I've had a lot of the similar thoughts about like it depends. It can really, like, if you enable everything, it can be too much of a nanny. And the thing that I really dislike the most is like, I've seen rules, I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but like I've seen rules that like disable specific syntax because it could be seen as confusing. And I feel like that's overreaching, but maybe that's not so much of a problem anymore. Or maybe I just never run into it anymore. I'm trying to think of something where I've seen that.
Isn't that lovely that all your complaints that you can think of are old and no longer an issue? It's like some group of people has been really... No, yeah, that is a common problem, especially from the days of ESLint plugin Airbnb, which tried to like get everyone on the same style, but we didn't yet learn as a community how to effectively do that for people. So it just pissed everyone off. And then a lot of people hated ESLint and linting as a result. But yeah, we don't do that anymore. We have an explicit rule in TypeScript ESLint, a behavioral rule, not a ESLint rule, that we don't take in new proposals that just ban syntax unless it's incredibly bad syntax. You should always ban, because most of the time that's just some stylistic preference. It's not actually useful.
Bring back with.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Would you like to explain, Nick, why that's such a terrible idea?
I think it's a fantastic idea. What are you talking about?
Can you imagine? So the with statement, you say with some object, and then all those objects' properties are in your scope. That's impossible to be type safe. Just structurally, you cannot make that thing type safe with the current model of TypeScript. It would be impossible.
You can't make things type safe, but you can use with in a way that will sandbox the code that's running in it, which makes it useful for certain things. But it's also deprecated and everybody hates it and doesn't want to add it to their new JavaScript runtime or what have you. Anyway, with is like a big deal for me. It's part of my job is the with statement.
Like you actively use it?
Yes, essentially. Yeah. It's like a core part of what we do on our security projects.
Interesting. This did not go the way I expected it to.
Yeah. No, with is actually really useful for like one thing, and that is like restricting the scope of stuff, because you can essentially stub out objects, right? So if you don't want somebody to be able to, I don't know, use array.slice or whatever, you can use the with statement to make it so it's a no op.
So like if you don't want people to call fetch or to modify built-in prototypes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this what shadow realms are supposed to help with as well? The TC39 proposal?
It's part of it. Yeah, it's part of it.
Okay. Fascinating.
And yes, there may be a day where we don't have to rely on the with statement for this. We're hoping. But right now the with statement is like, it's badass. And people don't even know.
Most people don't even know it exists in the first place. This entire sequitur is confusing and off-putting to most.
No. I mean, Crockford wrote about with, right? In the bad part, in the in JavaScript, the good parts, and how with is the devil, and mostly it is. But yeah, so nobody has people just disregard it as useless and bad, but it has a use.
This is absolutely fascinating. I love it. I love that in 2024, we found the one person using with based off of just a one-off comment. And this also explains why you're slowly coming around to TypeScript. You're just in this unsafe with place.
No, okay, yeah, no. But the code that runs in the with is not necessarily the code that I'm writing, right?
Sure.
So I don't care if it's type checked or not.
Yeah.
This is a big reason why it's so important that web dev tooling is flexible and fun. Everyone wants things to be standardized the one true way, but you will always, no matter how much time you spend in this space, you will always find people who are doing weird and wacky crap for actually really good reasons. And your tooling needs to be able to be flexible. Like there are people who pushed for TypeScript to not support the with keyword. But oh my God, I can't imagine a world where we would block us from adopting TypeScript. That would be awful for everyone.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there are runtimes that don't support it. They're passing everything in the test suite except the with statement, right? So, and they don't operate in what is sloppy mode, right? And it is important to implement what the spec says. And I think that's huge.
When you say runtimes, are you saying like Dino or Bun, like those kind of runtimes?
No, like JavaScript Core or V8 equivalents, like I don't know, QuickJS, stuff like that. Hermes, if you're into React Native, which does not support the with statement.
So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff about ESLint, typescript-eslint, this new flat config, some more standardized packages like create TypeScript app. There's lots to dig into, lots of improvements to it. And like you said, Josh, like, yeah, a lot of my disdain for it in the past probably did come from things like the Airbnb or ESLint config. And like it has a lot of really helpful use cases. And in particular, I do think that just like having the happy path, but knowing that you can just disable the rule if you know what you're doing. Like it's there to to be a check on yourself to not just do something silly. But if you can justify it and move on. It's great. Anything else you want to say that we didn't talk about regarding ESLint or TypeScript-eslint and their latest versions?
Yes. Thank you for offering. Typed linting or type-aware linting. It's the big thing. The major value prop, why we're putting so much effort into TypeScript-eslint, the ESLint plugin, is that we are the main, and I believe currently the only mainstream lint situation that can do type-aware or type-informed linting. That's writing ESLint or similar lint rules that can use the power of the type checker, such as TypeScripts. That's huge. That is a hugely important thing to be able to do. The big banner rule that we always talk about is no floating promises. Rules that can detect when you say create a promise and forget to await it, which is a very common problem that we all accidentally fall into. Rules around other async things like awaiting stuff that's not eventable. Custom rules to help you migrate off, deprecated endpoints because you know that the type of the thing is ... Typed linting is really hard because you're mapping between the ESLint way of doing things, which is a linter, and the TypeScript way of doing things, which doesn't even use the same AST format. As we were saying earlier, you have to map between the two to use TypeScript APIs. So that's why I haven't jumped over to something like Biome or lint yet, because we're the only thing, TypeScript-eslint is the only thing that supports type linting right now. I'm very excited. They're all working, or at least have it on their roadmap to work on their public RFCs and all these projects like Biome, the open source ones. But it's a really hard problem to solve because these projects are intentionally written in native speed, typically like Rust for many. You get incredible parallelization, you get very nice performance. But then TypeScript is not written in Rust, it's written in TypeScript, so JavaScript. And no one has yet solved the problem of how do you call to TypeScript type checking stuff in a way that doesn't slow your Rust linter down to the speed of a JavaScript linter. And I can't wait till someone does that. But until they do, I'm stuck. I'm keeping myself in the TypeScript-eslint space to be able to work on typed rules the way we have them now. Ta-da!
I'm processing that. I'm trying to think. I guess I never really realized the power of that, but it is really there. And floating promises is a really good example of it.
Wait. Why couldn't no floating promises be implemented in ESLint?
Let's say you import a function from another file. You need something like a type checker to know the return type of that function. And that's not something that works when you structurally run only one file at a time, the way ESLint is built. You would need something that looks at all your files, like TypeScript.
Oh, gosh. Now I just want to dig into that rabbit hole. It's like, okay, so ESLint works on one file at a time, but not TypeScript, right? And so that's got to be a challenging problem to solve.
Yeah, the big thing for TypeScript-eslint V8 is that we're stabilizing a new way of setting up type linting. Previously, we told people to use parseroptions.project, what we call the project. Now we're using parseroptions.project service, what we call the project service, which is this new API exposed by TypeScript for consumers like editors, VS Code, that we're kind of hooking onto also to make it a lot easier to set up type linting and hopefully with performance benefits as well for most users.
Yeah, I will say that I haven't tried this new thing, but it can be difficult to get that working in like a monorepo. Like, what do I put in this project field? And like you end up with files using the wrong TS config essentially. So that is a welcome change. And I'm eager to check it out and see if that makes things as easy as you claim they are. So.
Put me to the test. See what happens. F around and find out. Yeah, the first thing we did to make this easier, the first thing we did was we made it so you can set project true instead of explicitly passing all your TypeScript projects. For those who haven't done anything around this area, in order to configure your TypeScript, tell it where your files are, you have these tsconfig.json files, and you need to tell TypeScript-eslint where your tsconfigs are so that it can generate type info for you. First thing we did recently was set it so you can say project true to just find the closest tsconfig to each file. That honestly works for many cases. But now project service says use the same APIs that my editor is using. So if my editor is doing something funky and different, if I've got like weird project references set up, just go along with whatever that is. And we found that that's both easier for users. You don't have weird situations where you need to specify projects, and faster because those code paths are more optimized than the manual work we were doing before. So please do put me to the test.
But by editor, you mean the TS server, like the language server itself, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The language server, which is what VS Code and other editors use, calls to the same APIs that the project service, which we are using, calls to. Language server, project service. It is unfortunate naming, but that's what we've been given.
And so the language server is not the project service.
Correct. The language server is a piece of TypeScript that runs in your editor and communicates with your running editor session to inform you of squigglies or other issues, little diagnostics in your code. But I'm probably messing up some of this because it's been a while since I've spelunked. But generally speaking, the language server is the editor situation. And then within that, you have the one instance, and that one instance of something calls to the project service, which is what generates for a given source file, the TypeScript project defining its types. Does that track?
I mean, I kind of get it. But so basically, it's better and faster, and it's more correct.
Yes.
That's fine.
Sorry. One of the lovely things about working on typescript-eslint is that we're in beta. I haven't figured out really how to explain this stuff, and there are not a lot of people to talk to about how do you explain the project service option. So if folks want to help me out here, please do. I would gladly take issues, like GitHub issues, explaining or suggesting how we could better explain this to folks in our docs, because we're struggling.
And there's a Discord.
Yeah, TypeScript-eslint Discord, linked on our website. Join, yell at us, honestly. Tell us how we can do better.
That's what I did.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
I thought you were very nice.
Well, I did complain.
Well, you have good things to say. Thank you for those.
You're welcome.
Now I need to join and just search for Bone Skull with, and then see where it takes me. So not to switch gears too much, but you did mention something, and I wanted to bring it up. You mentioned the language server, which adds little squigglies to your editor. And that made me think of SquiggleConf, which is a conference dedicated to dev tooling. Do you want to talk more about that?
I would. Thank you, Nick. Yes. What a great segue. Nicely done. SquiggleConf is a conference I'm one of the two lead organizers for, along with Dimitri, who runs Michigan TypeScript. Shout out, Dimitri. We're running it in October 3rd for a single day, single tracks of talks, and then October 4th for separate paid workshops. It is a conference all about excellent web dev tooling, the things that give you squigglies and other fun stuff at dev time. So stuff like TypeScript, ESLint, Biome, Zig, all these fun tools and the processes and people around them. I'm really excited about it, and it's terrifying and nerve-wracking to run a conference for the first time, but I think I've done enough conferences that I have kind of a sense for how to do the right thing here.
Yeah, I think based on what I know about it, single day, single track, it's going to be nerve-wracking, but I've done 9 of those, and they are probably, I mean, it's straightforward because you have a limited number of speakers and a limited number of paths that people can take, because it's one path. It's just the straightforward path. So everybody has the same experience, and you can kind of guide based on that. So that's really good. But yeah, that's exciting. And first time conference. Yeah, that was so much fun. Like just going through everything. And so I'm really excited for you.
Thanks. Do you have any advice?
Surround yourself with good people who jump in and help out. Let's see. If it's single day, single track, think about the audience that's going to come for this. If it's going to be or if a majority of it's going to be local, and you're thinking about doing something like an after party, one big mistake that we made at Nebraska JS Conf the first time was assuming that all 200 something participants at the conference were going to be at the after party. So we had food for over 200 people, and then like 30 showed up because everybody, like a majority of the people who came were local. And so what do local people usually have to do at the end of the workday? Go back to their families, go take care of their kids, things like that. We didn't think about that too much. So we ended up donating a lot of food to the homeless shelter, and that was fine. But we adjusted accordingly for the following years. And then a lot of it revolves around food. Like if you're serving food, people remember food. It's like a wedding. Like if people don't eat, we ran out of food at my wedding, and never heard the end of that. So
Love it. Yeah, we're not buying food for lunch. That we just don't have the money. The tickets would be twice the costs. But we are in the New England Aquarium's IMAX theater in Boston.
Nice.
Probably the comfiest conference seats I've ever seen, and it's right next to, I don't know how to say it yet, Faneuil, the marketplace that has a lot of food shops. So we're hopeful that by just sending people over there, they'll have a fun Boston experience. And if they're vegan, etc., they can get what they need.
That's awesome and hilarious, because my first conference was in an aquarium.
Really?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Shout out the Boston Aquarium. It's got a fantastic penguins exhibit. Really, really cute.
That's awesome. Do you have any? Well, so I think by the time this episode goes out, the CFP will be closed. So can't promote that probably on this, but people should definitely check it out. I'm biased because I'm just like, I love dev tooling so much. And when I saw this, I was like, yes, I'm so happy that this exists. And I'm so happy that you're the one doing it as like, somebody who is so deep into this world, like perfect person. So that's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I would encourage anyone who wants to learn about excellent web dev tooling. You don't have to be like a framework author or open source extraordinaire. Just if you have an interest in the tools you use. Yeah, I'm hopeful that it'll go well. Thank you. Squiggleconf.com. Fun fact, the website is built in Astro. I like using these little projects as an excuse to try new things in tech. So
nice.
One of the things also that I'm doing with it is just trying to bring together people to have nice conversations. Like, this is really good user research for me. Like, what does everyone there actually think of ESLint and Typescript-eslint?
Nice. That's great. That's a great idea. I mean, you mentioned Astro, and I want to go deep on that too. But there's another topic that I wanted to bring up too, that we talked about before this, and that is Mocha. Because we have the current and former maintainers of Mocha here. So we should take advantage of that and talk about that. So how do you want the format to be? Do you want it to be a therapy session, a retro? What do you think, Chris?
I don't know. I mean, if you ask questions, I can try to answer some, but yeah.
Let's start with what Mocha is first.
Mocha is a flexible and fun testing framework for Node and browsers. You define tests with syntax that many test runners use, like describe and it or test as functions, and then it'll run those tests, letting you know if any failed. The key differentiators for Mocha is, well, for starters, it's old. It's like a decade old also. Like, I learned to unit test in JavaScript on Mocha. It's not as big and expansive as more modern ones like Jest and btest. So it does less, but it is much smaller and leaner as a result. And in fact, actually can outperform both of those in some cases, because it's just running JavaScript. It doesn't do all sorts of fancy like module isolation or anything. Unfortunately for Mocha, it fell out of maintenance mode for a few years in and out. And so now I'm one of the current maintainers of Mocha somehow, despite having never actually worked on a testing framework before.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I started, I never worked on a testing framework either. So
great.
But it's, yeah.
Chris, what was your tenure, or when did you maintain Mocha?
Well, I don't remember. I know it was for about 5 years, 5.5 years or something like that, where I was maintaining, and I learned by the seat of your pants, because at the time, Mocha was the most depended upon project in the ecosystem. And later, ESLint took over that top spot, and Mocha's lost adoption since. But yeah, it was really popular when I started, and so that kind of a new maintainer, not really sure. I'd never even maintained a project before, I don't think, and so I wasn't really sure how to handle things. I learned, but yeah. I got tired of it. I burnt out of it. But hopefully that won't happen to you.
Oh, it's already happening. I'm on my path to burnout. It's inevitable. That's the nature of open source right now. You're off alone doing your thing. If you're lucky, you get people who might sometimes intersect with you, but it's a very lonely, isolating experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't the only one. I mean, there were other people involved too, but still, like, I think for most of the time, most of the other maintainers didn't have a lot of time for it. And I really felt this imbalance between like trying to carry the project and just the like overwhelming number of users. And, Josh, at least I think that you are experienced with that. You're experienced with either maintaining or leading a project that has such a large user base and maybe not so many maintenance resources.
Yeah. I'd say this year is probably the biggest year for me in terms of projects. When I was lead on TSLint, which was my first major open source project I was on, it was a very small number of months before they decided to kill the project and move over to ESLint and Typescript-eslint. Also, when I was there, it was a similar situation where just none of the existing maintainers had time. They were all completely capable, very, very, much. They knew more than me, but just, time is hard. So then I dropped out a bit. Now I'm on Typescript-eslint, but I'm not the only maintainer there. And I'm not on core maintenance of ESLint. I'm just on committer team. So in some ways for me, Mocha feels like the first time I'm trying such a large thing as a maintainer. But also Mocha is no longer on the ascent. It's not top of mind for most people. I think most of our users are kind of legacy at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I still use it. It's my go-to just because I'm typically only writing for Node and I don't need the things that it just gives me, right? I'm not bundling stuff. I don't need V-test or what have you. I think as work continues on Node's own test runner, I'm probably going to adopt it in more of my projects. But there's still a need for a good assertion library.
Yeah, which Mocha.
So what's the plan with Mocha then? Like, what are you trying to do to it? Because I know at least one of those maintainers had some PR that he wanted to get in to support like aggregate errors or something like that. And he was annoyed that it sat there like open for a year. And I was like, well, nobody's really maintaining it. So, we got, I kind of, that was kind of a kick in the butt to raise the alarm about it.
Yeah, I actually just started reviewing that PR today. Support reporting aggregate errors.
Yeah. Okay. The thing is, like, you got to be so careful with the output. Like, the output of Mocha, and especially the default output of Mocha, if you change it, it will break somebody. And maybe that's not true anymore because there aren't as many users as there used to be, but that's what I was looking at. So when you go and you want to support aggregate error, well, like, what's the blast radius of this? And that's what I had to evaluate for any change like that. Anything that was ostensibly a improvement to the UI or UX or output was just like, okay, how many people is this going to break? Is it really worth it? And so I think doing stuff like aggregate error and keeping pace with the language as it evolves is important for Mocha. But yeah. So, but what else do you got? What else you got in store? You got I don't know. Are you gonna do add your default assertion library? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Rewrite the website or?
Ooh, rewriting the website would be interesting. We're as an umbrella, we're just keeping it afloat. We're not looking to reinvent any wheels. Keeping it afloat is kind of a flexible term, and I think it actually does include revamping the website. Do you remember back in the day, everyone's website was like 5,000 lines long and it had every single possible thing you could want on the single page, the front page? Mocha is the only open source project I come across now that I actually use that still does that. Like everyone else has moved to some kind of page navigation,
You said that as I was scrolling this massive page.
Yeah. It's like what?
It's like the only website where Command F or Control F will find you what you need, right?
Yeah. It's Mocha and Zod at this point. The problem with that type of thing is that it can be very overwhelming. I can't speak to the user experience of using the Zod site, so I don't know if there was an explicit decision to keep it that way for them. But for Mocha, it means that you have to give the same docs experience to people who are just kind of looking on the surface for how to vaguely do stuff, and people who are deeply trying to understand. Those two are very different forms of docs to write. So what I'd love to do is split the site out into, features, options, deeper dives, have a real docs website. That I think would be good and within the realm of keeping it afloat. I'd also love, we've been talking about making it work on alternate runtimes, speaking of which, like Bun and Dino, because there's actually not really, to our knowledge, one test runner that works well across all of those. And that might be a nice value prop for Mocha itself because it's so simple.
Yeah, that should work, right? That should work. It doesn't do anything weird.
Yeah.
The only weird thing it does is add some globals.
Yeah. How nice would that be if you could, if you wanted to write code for both Bun and Node, and you could write your tests in one situation in just JavaScript or TypeScript, and then it would just validate, okay, this does work the same on both those.
Mm-hmm.
Does Mocha provide any? Does it provide any? Really, the only other ones that I've used are Jest and VTest, and the big difference, or not, I guess a thing that I like in both of those is being able to mock things. Does Mocha provide any of that out of the box, or is it strictly just here's the test layout and assertions?
Nah. Mocha is much closer to the platform, to Node, and it doesn't provide any of that stuff, which means that actually it kind of has a nice story for transpiling modules support because it can directly use Node importers or loaders. But then, doing like module mocks is, I actually don't know how to do that in Mocha. I have to refresh on that. Chris, do you know how to do that in Mocha if there's like a sanctioned way right now?
There's no sanctioned way. I can tell you that I use a library called Rewire Mock to do it.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate. I think that part of fleshing out Node's ESM story should involve having a nice way for alternate test runners like Mocha to do that. It really is a core need that, honestly, I don't like how any test framework does it now. I don't like how it's not type safe in just.mock or v.mock. I, again, have yet to come up with a better solution, but I hope, inshallah, there is one later that we will discover.
Yeah, I'm interested in what's the story around using loaders with Mocha? Because back when I was working on it, there were no such thing, right? And it barely supports ESM, like native ESM. So, yeah, that's. I'm curious where we'll go with that, because for ESM you need something like a loader if you want to mock a module.
Is that the only use case for them, for loaders?
No, you can do all sorts of terrible things with loaders. Just crazy. You can do, loaders are awesome, actually. You should poke around at them.
I want to. Can you give an example? Not to derail this, but could you give an example of something crazy you could do with a loader?
I mean, you could, so you could use a loader to parse and run JavaScript out of a markdown file. Like, that's just an example. But, you can do it. It allows you to basically touch two things. It allows you module resolution. You can control how anything that is requested is resolved. And two, it allows you to return, basically you get a path and you can return any sort of, a string. All right, you can return a string, and that is the JavaScript that you want to run. And so whatever you can do with those two things is a lot of things. Loaders are cool, yeah.
Yeah, you can do things like if the person imports from a TypeScript file, transpile it to JavaScript first, which makes for a really nice story of running TypeScript via Mocha instead of something that automatically bundles or does SWC or Babel like VTest or Jest.
Yeah. I think I have used that with a project called, I think it's TSImp, maybe?
TSImp. Yeah. Yeah. There are a few of these that have, yeah. Are you a big fan of it, Nick?
Yeah.
I did like it as an alternative to, what's that? Is it TS Node? I was just using it to write shell scripts basically in TypeScript.
Yeah. First there was TS Node, and then there was TSImp and TSUP. TSUP's the builder, but TSX is the one I personally use.
Yeah,
I really like TSX, but it does hurt me that it's the same name as the JSX TypeScript file extension. That is a little confusing.
Yes, but it was very straightforward. You just write the TypeScript file, and then run Node with that -- loader. I think it's tsimp/loader, and then the file, and it runs. And that was great.
It's actually really straightforward oftentimes to run TypeScript on servers now. It used to be a whole pain in the rear where you had to have a separate build step and whatever. Now you can do just-in-time transpiling, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, TSX is solid. TS Node is solid. There's plenty of ways to do it.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Jest for a lot of people became the way they liked to do testing in Node because it solved the big pain points of using prior things like Mocha, TypeScript support, or Babel at the time we were still using. And then VTest came along because Jest was slower and harder to configure. But now that it's actually straightforward at the platform level to support stuff like TypeScript, the value prop of something like a Jest or VTest, it's still there, but it's, I think, a little lessened, which is a nice opportunity for folks to, again, think, well, how can we make this stuff even simpler and even more straightforward? Someone else will think on that.
I like that. Keep it as simple as possible and build from there with plugins or something.
Also, like I think people want code coverage too.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And Mocha doesn't do that out of the box. And if you run it in parallel mode, you're not going to get it because of the way it works. But people wanted that stuff, and now with Jest it came with it, and now people expect it.
Yeah. I would love more common and more fleshed out support for code coverage across parallel runs or across different tools even. I think a big annoyance that I always used to have was I would have end-to-end tests in one tool, like Cypress back in the day, now Playwright, and then unit tests in another tool. Like I personally use VTest for my projects. And it's just a pain in the rear to get services to merge them together. I have yet to find in my once a year angry searching a really reliable way to merge. Please correct me if that exists now, but that would be nice.
I can't think of anything. That's a tough problem to solve, I feel like, because like an end-to-end test could touch a lot of stuff. And how would you count that?
You'd have to instrument your entire app, which is not impossible, but not great. But even like Chris said with parallel mode, like in theory, if I'm building a testing framework that I want to be as simple as possible, I would hope that there are good tools for each of the steps, like loaders, like code coverage. And it's exciting to see that folks are constantly iterating on these things. But it means that if you're taking a step out of the sanctioned path of something like VTest and trying to use an older tool like Mocha, it does mean you have to kind of figure out what the current state of all these different things is, which is an added tax, and why I personally just still use VTest for all my personal repos.
So Josh, you're covering the linting piece, the testing piece, the conference piece. Talk about all of these things. What's next for you? What's the next piece of that conglomerate? Probably
fewer pieces. I want to calm down. The first year you run a conference, I think, as you know, is the hardest, the most amount of new work. I'm mostly cutting out conference travel because I do a lot of, or have historically done a lot of conferences, and it's tiring, and I miss my family. But yeah, I want to get typescript-eslint V8 into stable. I want to get create TypeScript app good and split out that create thing. And then once I have that create thing, I want to try to roll it out to more use cases, like if you have a create next app or create React app equivalent. And my last project is once I figure out monorepos, which is necessary for this create thing, I have this old project called Typestat that I'm renaming to TSLift that converts JavaScript to TypeScript. And I think that's going to be my swan song of open source. I think that's going to be the thing where I like focus on that last. And then before quitting open source and going back into industry, that project is going to be my white whale that I may or may not ever finish.
I can't tell you how much I want that tool right now.
I used to worry, will people still want this in 5 years? And now it's been 5 years and people want it more than ever. It would be so nice to get working, but it's such a hard problem figuring out what people want in their code.
Yeah. And I don't think the language, like just the ecosystem itself doesn't make it easy in any way. I was thinking about this in terms of like other languages, because I've been dabbling in code mods for a while, and I'm like, oh, I could just write a bunch of code that can do all of these conversions like that. Like specifically, the latest one I was working on was like converting Material UI to Tailwind components and just like having an easy transition between those. Pretty straightforward for that. But then I've also like taken up some work converting an old React project that hasn't been touched since 2016, 2017 into modern React. And so that's a lot of like removing classes and, getting function components and cleaning up a lot of pain points that are in there as well to be compatible with React 18 or React 19 coming up. And I was talking to a friend about this who does mostly like PHP development. And they're like, oh yeah, I just use Laravel and I pay for this subscription, and it's like basically a code mod as a service that plugs into their GitHub, and it just keeps them up to date on the latest Laravel. And it's like a subscription that they're happy to pay for every year to easily do that. And I'm just thinking like that would be so awesome in our ecosystem. And it feels so impossible because there's not like a one way to do things in the way that I perceive it being in like Laravel or Rails. It's just like, how could you write such a tool to do that? And I feel like it'd be the same for like just JavaScript to TypeScript. Like there's the language can be so, you can be so forgiving in what you write as JavaScript, what counts as JavaScript, and converting that to TypeScript can be a pain.
Yeah, Angular is the closest thing we have to that right now. They have migrations between versions, but it's not the same. There's a code mod service, literally called Code Mod, that they're trying to build up that's getting nice partnerships, but it's a hard problem.
For sure.
I don't know, just can you imagine how nice it would be if we solved that?
Well, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people trying to solve that with AI.
Oh my God. I can't stand it.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. That's sad. The annoying thing is AI actually is kind of well positioned to help with it. It's a god awful way to run an application. I would never build an application using AI as the core foundation of it. Not the current round today. But when everything else is exhausted, when you have no more, like known ways to improve the code, and you just need to figure out what interface should be used for this function parameters type, getting AI in there might actually be this is better than nothing kind of guess, because a lot of these tools are very iterative and they're known to guess wrong in each iteration as they improve. I really hate that that's the case. I just don't want to use AI in there.
I could see a tool working pretty well like that, where it does everything that it can, and the things it's not sure about, it can punt and say, okay, Chat GPT, what do you think?
That'd be interesting. Yeah. Just here's what I know I did right, and then here's just a wag at getting it for the rest.
Yeah,
but document it well. That'd be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I gave a talk at Cascadia JS this year called "Your AI Needs an Assistant," talking about what AI is or is not good for. AI is really bad at creation. It just synthesizes stuff together. It's basically global autocomplete. So what I did was I wrote a tool that, given like a leak code style problem, biggest number in array, return that. It generates an initial solution with AI and then keeps running it through generated unit tests, also linting and type checking. And whenever there's a complaint, which of course there's going to be because AI doesn't solve code well, typically, it feeds that complaint into the AI, and then the AI fixes the code in this beautiful virtuous cycle of eventually it actually is pretty good at solving issues, like 7 OpenAI or Gemini calls later.
That's interesting.
Only costs 1 barrel of oil to run all those AI calls.
Yeah.
I will say, just like digging in, like the thing that I've found AI to be the most useful for is like some of this AST stuff. Like it actually knows ASTs really well in terms of like helping me to be able to properly query for something, or just knowing the APIs that are out there, like in the TypeScript compiler or in ESLint to find all of that, because it's so well documented. Like it can regurgitate that pretty well.
It kind of sucks working on projects that aren't a common tech area. For example, when I work on typescript-eslint, when I'm fixing up an ESLint rule, the amount of help I get that's good from something like Copilot or SourceGraph Cody is much less, because there's just so much less code in production writing lint rules. And then when I jump to raw code mods, it's basically useless for me. It's really upsetting. But then when I jump back into React, oh my God, it's fantastic. It does everything.
Well, Josh, we've taken up a lot of your time, touched on a lot of different things. You're doing a lot of amazing work in the community. And so I want to thank you for doing all of that, for making it easier for me to write TypeScript, and for Chris to continue his slow fanboyism in jumping into it. So thank you. Any parting words before we go?
To anyone listening, try out typescript-eslint v8 with the project service. If it's still in beta, please help us find bugs and performance issues. If it's not in beta, as I suspect will be the case, oh my god, it's so nice. And always check out our, if you have a lint config you haven't redone in a while, check out our preset shareable configs, our recommended and recommended type checked in particular. That stuff is great. And if you're not using just the recommended rules from ESLint and typescript-eslint, you're missing out on a whole bunch of good stuff. But yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
After recording this, Nick and myself sat down with Josh and his co-organizer of SquiggleConf to brainstorm ways we could work together on the event. Turns out Nick not only will be attending, he will be emceeing. So you might want to attend yourself. Learn more at squiggleconf.com. Next up on the pod, we've been hitting you with a bunch of interviews lately, so we're taking a break to check in on what's new in the web dev world. The Node team has been making some moves, for instance, which we'll discuss in detail on the next episode. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Head to jsparty.fm and hey, tell your friends too. The more, the merrier. Thanks once again to our partners at Fly.io, to our Beatfreak in residence, Breakmaster Cylinder, and to our friends at Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG to save $100 on a Sentry team plan. Why not, right? All right, that is all for now, but come on back and party with us again next week.